earliest days of electricity, independent North Carolina towns found ways to create their own electricity and light their own streets. As those towns grew, they made electricity an integral part of their lives. They restored power when nature's fury had shut it down. They kept pace with the improvements in technology. And today, they are still as fiercely independent and dedicated to providing their communities with locally controlled power. They are public power, and they are lighting their own way. The year is 1889, only 24 years after the Civil War ended, and 12 years before the first automobile would be mass-produced in the United States. A new, revolutionary technology is sweeping the country. Everyone is talking about the marvel, the miracle of electricity. As early as 1880, a town in the Midwest had lit up their own courthouse square with electric lights that folks said could be seen from 20 miles away. Thomas Edison started providing power to New York City in 1882. Soon, cities and towns throughout the nation were finding ways to light their streets. In North Carolina, private power companies were formed to do just that. And starting with Raleigh in 1885, the big cities in North Carolina began to get electricity. But what about the smaller cities and towns?
No one was interested in providing power here. Generation of power was not dependable. The miles of line for the number of customers just made the return on the investment almost impossible.
Nobody wanted a small town, a small community. If you didn't do it yourself, you just sat back and had to wait until somebody said, oh, that may be profitable to provide some service in that community. But that was going to be a long time down the road.
The small towns of North Carolina don't want to wait. They want the benefit of this amazing new technology right now. And in 1889, Statesville becomes the first North Carolina town to build its own city-owned electric system.
At the time, there was no other way to do it. They actually purchased a steam generator, and it was first fired by wood. They had to construct a system. They had to put up the poles and the wires. They had to put up the street lights.
Statesville was the first, but many towns across North Carolina followed soon after, like Edenton, Fayetteville, Laurinburg, Concord, Rocky Mount, Greenville, and Morganton.
When they first put the lights in on Morganton, I can remember, I thought it was a great business. It looked awful good.
Of course, we were excited about it. It made a lot of difference in a lot of ways. You were able to do more things.
It was a natural that the cities provide power to the small towns. It was a good deal for the industrial and commercial and business leaders of the community because it meant that they were going to be able to electrify and that progress would take place.
Electricity was first used for streetlights, but soon it was lighting businesses and homes. Electricity began to change the lives of North Carolinians in ways they found miraculous.
Well, it was like a God-sent miracle. You didn't have to get up in the morning to make fire. You didn't have to go in the kitchen to clean out the stove and build a fire to cook breakfast.
People in the county was amazed at it. They were getting uptown getting that power. Before we got it, you couldn't see at night hardly for the lamps. It would be just shadows like. We finally got power. One light bulb in each room, one outlet in the whole house, and a 25-watt light bulb.
And look at it and just wonder, how in the world can this come in the house? We saw it on the street, but to have it in the home was wonderful.
We had the first electric stove in Laurinburg. People came to look at it. See, and asked my mother how it worked. Now, she wouldn't let the old stove go for a long time. So it was still sitting there, the old black wood stove, right side of the new electric stove.
I remember our first Christmas tree with electric. See, we used to put candles on it. And when my mother turned that on, oh, That was Santa Claus right there for us. We didn't want anything else, just to sit and look at those beautiful lights.
In the 20th century, as North Carolina grew, the need for electricity grew. Private investor-owned electric companies and public city-owned electric departments grew too. In 1935, there were 80 public power towns in North Carolina. By this time, many of these towns had stopped generating their own power and were buying it at wholesale rates from the private companies. But the towns still put up their own power lines and streetlights, operated the substations, made repairs, and sent out the bills. The towns had local control over their electric systems, and most of them found that to be a great benefit to the community.
I would imagine that our forefathers here in Statesville realized that having their own distribution guaranteed them a certain amount of control over the transmission, which they felt like they would not have if somebody else were doing it. Who knows this community better than the people that live here, the people that serve here? And that's a sense of control that I'm not willing to give up, particularly now that I have it and have had it for 113 years.
And it was not just the city leaders who wanted that local control. The citizens of the towns liked it too.
If they see something they don't like, they have the control. You know, they can go to city council, they can get things changed. Customers come to us and say, why don't you adopt a rate that looks like this? And we have done that. And, you know, with a big utility, a big investor owned, that's probably not going to happen.
If you have a problem with your power, you can go right to the top. You can call the mayor up.
Anybody who needs to call me can call me. And they do. They can come right over here and pay their bill. There's somebody here.
We're all local people, and we are able to work with the people closer. And that's the closeness that we have by being able to be our own power source. Those people know us, and they know us like a family.
It gives the community flexibility. There are things that our electric department does, little things, small things, but they mean a lot to a community. Things like just putting a flagpole up or putting a flag back on a pole.
At Christmas time, we can take our department and we can help out downtown. We put up Christmas decorations. But more than that, when you have the local people here and you have that tragedy or you have that need, you know that they're responsive, and it's the people that you know. And there's a tremendous comfort with that.
Public power towns faced their share of disasters over the years. Tornadoes, hurricanes, ice storms, floods. And here again, that hometown spirit served them well.
I believe it was 1938, that tornado struck Winslow. It also struck Edmond.
Everything was cracking and breaking around you and so forth. Of course, and the wind blowing and the rain coming down, we stayed out there basically all night. Put it up, next thing you know, be back on the ground again because another tree fall.
We worked 5 straight days getting trees and things like that. We accomplished the job without calling in other help.
You might think at first, because we are a small utility, that we can't respond as quickly as a large utility, but actually the opposite is true. Our linemen all live in the community. When there is an outage, we have people who respond literally within 5 to 10 minutes.
Whether they were recovering from disasters or just finding ways to provide better, more cost-efficient services, public power towns have always been able to put the needs of their communities first.
It's partly about control. I mean, we control the system, but I think mostly it's about people. It's about being able to serve people. It's not about profits.
Working for an investor-owned utility, your focus is always on the bottom line and returning dividends to your shareholders. That's who you really work for ultimately, is the people who own the stock in the company. Working for a public power, the money that the utility does generate comes back into the community. You're working to earn a return to your citizens, both through better service and through reduced operating costs. It's wonderful that you're not driven by always having to earn a dollar, but more driven by what's right for your customers.
As North Carolina moved through the rest of the 20th century, new situations required new ways of providing electricity throughout the state. In 1935, all the cities and towns in North Carolina had electricity, while only 3.5% of the farms did. To help get power to rural areas, the people who lived there were allowed to form nonprofit electric co-ops. At the same time, the private power companies began to merge. By the 50s and 60s, there were 3 types of power providers competing for customers in North Carolina. A few large private power companies, the rural co-ops, and a number of small public power towns. To avoid duplication of services, territories were assigned to the different providers, and it was during this time that the towns formed a statewide organization to give public power a unified voice. Things worked pretty well, until the energy shortages of the 1970s. Public power departments were now buying virtually all of their power from private power companies, and they were feeling the brunt of the shortages.
The bills basically kept going up, 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 and up.
The cities fought for cheap power, and Duke, of course, being an investor-owned utility, wanted to maximize its profits. Secondly, it was thought at that time that we wouldn't be able to keep up with the demand for power. Nuclear power was thought commonly to be the answer, but those were expensive facilities to build. Produces cheap electricity, but very costly to build.
After years of fighting over rate increases, a solution began to be apparent. The private power companies wanted to build nuclear plants, but they were not in a financial position to raise the money themselves. The public power towns needed a reliable, inexpensive source of power, and they had the ability to issue bonds and raise the money needed to build the plants. If the towns helped pay for the plants, they would own a portion of those plants and would be able to better control the cost of the electricity they received.
We were convinced and took all the evidence that was presented to us that the only way to really preserve power at a rate that citizens could afford was to join up with the power companies in building these nuclear plants, and the evidence all supported that.
2 power agencies were formed, the North Carolina Eastern Municipal Power Agency in the east and North Carolina Municipal Power Agency No. 1 in the west. 29 cities chose to remain independent, but 51 other public power towns joined these agencies, and together they agreed to partner with Duke Power and CP&L to have joint ownership of several nuclear and coal power plants.
That was a great idea, and the projections were wonderful, and the cost of nuclear power at the time was very reasonable. And then all of a sudden, 3 Mile Island comes about, and the cost of building nuclear power plants goes up almost tenfold. So then the cost was just absolutely astronomical, and the cities that joined into this power agency got locked into very high cost, and interest rates were extremely high, and all of it together just put the towns in a bad situation. But at the time, they acted on good faith because the public was demanding it.
I think if I had to do it again, I would vote to do it again. But with the evidence now, hindsight is a little bit better. I mean, we did not know about the cost overruns that were going to occur, so we got stuck with a large bill. But I think one thing that's encouraging, the cities have continued to make their payments on their debt. They're getting out of debt, and I think there's a bright future ahead.
And we'll continue to pay down the debt, and North Carolina will be very happy that 51 cities actually did invest with bonds to buy into these nuclear power plants, because we're going to need it.
The cities involved faced this crisis with the same determination they had when they started providing electricity, and with the same focus, serving their citizens. They have worked hard to help keep costs to their customers down by helping their customers find ways to cut their energy consumption, by refinancing their debt at lower interest rates, and, when possible, by not passing on wholesale rate increases. All of the public power towns have worked to keep their service second to none. And they have found it really helps to have a statewide organization. By joining together, they are able to help one another to provide services like training and emergency backup.
We celebrated our 100th year in 1989, and we had a little present that year in the form